This is the hottest ticket in town tonight.
So that's a great feeling for the big lad from Pontypool.
Are you ready for the comeback? You know we the ones that ready for whatever. We gon' have to show them something, man. Let me see them hands up all the way front back. You don't understand that I'm doing what you can with no cap. This is the return of the one. You ain't see him coming, you just heard drums. They've been ready for the battle, any person that comes. Got the weight of the world on them, yeah, they too strong. I might have been down, nah. It's on sight, you gon' figure that out. And I might have been down, not out. Only one thing I gotta know now. So are you ready for the comeback? Yeah. Are you ready for the? Are you ready for the comeback? You know we the ones that. Let me see them hands up all the way front back. Yeah, this the comeback. Are you ready for the comeback?
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Well, welcome to the Autumn Nation Series preview show with me, Christina Mahon. In this show, comedian and rugby fan Tom Houghton and I will be looking at all the teams playing in this November and building our best Fantasy 15. But I reckon we probably need a help from maybe one or two rugby legends. No offence, Tom.
No, I think that's a really wise idea. My knowledge is limited. I think these guys are the experts.
Well, hopefully. Welcome to the stage, Wales and Lions captain Sam Warburton and the man who has won literally everything in rugby, Springboks all-time try scorer, Bryan Habana.
Oh, comfy.
Hello.
We all sit down now.
It's not.
Welcome, guys, welcome. Have you ever been to this building before?
Never.
I have, but it was dark. And when I read the brief, I didn't realise it was 42 floors up, so I sprawled out like a spider on the way up. So I didn't know it was this high. I hate heights. So I'm glad that I'm this side of the room, so I wouldn't like to be where you are, Tom.
I'm quite nervous. I'm nervous watching me, knowing that that's behind me. I feel like a pantomime.
Cool.
That's great for you. I would have thought someone of your height. What height are you?
6'3".
I would have thought you would have been okay with heights. Like, I'm 5'4.5", which is very important. And I did okay coming up in this lift.
We used to get, like, obviously thrown up in line-outs. And I remember there was a player who used to lift us from the front, and he was 6'9". And my feet would be, like, sort of kicking the top of his head. But catching line-outs and stuff like that, you're conditioned to that. Flying up a lift at 20, 30 mile an hour, that's a whole new ball game.
If you freeze frame every line-out he's done, he's actually got his eyes closed every time.
I was going to say, do you get lost in thought, or have you ever, like in a training session, did you ever kind of look around and start noticing what was going on around you and be like, oh, I didn't realise, I saw this from this height? Or
No, it's not. Line-outs is very... you see the players who come back from injury, and because when you go up as well, when you see it at international level as well, the guys are so strong, they throw you up so quick, and they've got to catch at the bottom. Guys who always come back from injury, haven't been up for maybe 3, 4, 5 months, they'll always pull their knees up and they fall to the ground, and two guys got to catch them, and it takes a while to get used to that. You've got to get conditioned to be thrown up at that. There's a lot of trust in your guys as well, but that's a piece of cake looking back. This is much harder.
Well, Tom, does this kind of feel like a bit of a homecoming for you, seeing as you used to live in the Tower of London?
I did. My old home is just over there somewhere, I think. I used to do rugby training with the Beefeaters in the moat as well. Oh. We used to have circuit training. Moats are very adaptable spaces.
Well, then talk to us about that, because obviously you did play rugby at some point.
I did. I was fly half, because I had the best hair for a while, and then they realised I couldn't catch or pass very well, so they stuck me on the wing, which is normally where they put the person with the least amount of talent.
Would you agree with that?
Least amount of talent. So you're not particularly fast. Tom Saraceni.
Sorry, no, I would. But what happened then, Bryan? Speaking as a fellow winger. Okay, cool. Perfect. I then got acne and braces when I was a teenager, so I looked feral. So I got made into a flanker.
Are flankers do they usually look quite feral, Sam, in your opinion?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wasn't me. Sorry. Wasn't me.
And obviously, as a rugby fan, we were kind of having a chat earlier. You were brushing up a little bit on the rules.
Yeah, because we want to attract new players to the game, and the rules are often quite the most intimidating part of rugby. So I want to just say what the rules are for anyone who's new to the game. Basically, you've got 2 teams, 1 ball, 1 pitch, 1 ref. On your team, you've got forwards and you've got backs. Then the other team have got their forwards and their backs. The idea is you're trying to get your forwards and backs to go forward, while the other forwards and backs are trying to make you go backwards. Both backs and forwards can run backwards and forwards, but they can only pass backwards. Any back or forward while running backwards and forwards can kick the ball forward, but in order for the other forwards and backs to pick it up, they have to be further back than the original back and forward was, and he kicked it forward. If while running backwards and forwards, a back or forward takes the ball out sideways, a forward throws the ball sideways to the forwards, who then passes it backwards back to the backs, who then try and go forward. If while running backwards and forwards, a back or forward drops the ball forward, play continues forward, allowing the other forwards and backs a chance to go forward. If they don't go forward, play goes back to the back of it was where he dropped it forward. If you draw it backwards, it's totally fine.
Can you repeat that back to us?
That's very good.
Well done.
That took me a week and a half to memorise. Thank you very much.
Very well done, Tom. Very well done.
Thank you.
Well, look, guys, are you very, very excited about the start of the Autumn Nations? How are you feeling?
I am extremely excited. I honestly think the top 8 teams in world rugby are at their most competitive we've seen in the professional era. Since the game's become professional in '96, literally from 1 to 8, you don't know, who could potentially win, and there's some absolute crackers. You got South Africa against Ireland, you got France, South Africa the following weekend, you got England playing against South Africa and New Zealand this autumn. So, teams looking ahead of a World Cup to really bed down what their squads are going to look like, what those potential players are that are going to be bolsters, but also, what they're wanting to achieve. And going into a final Six Nations period, but a World Cup less than 8 months out, there's going to be a lot of excitement, and it's bigger, it's better, and what a way to see some of the developing nations also, the likes of the Fijis, the Italys of the world, coming and trying to produce the goods.
I like it because it's, and I've always said from a Northern Hemisphere perspective, I can't speak from a rugby championship point of view, but it's the hardest international campaign because it's back-to-back and it's intense. And it most closely replicates a World Cup. So I think that's why the teams take it so seriously. Australia have got a 5-game series, and that's obviously to prep them for that. And the quality of opposition, they're always a pretty good quality of opposition. You might get someone like a Georgia who's developing, but they're still going to provide worthy opposition, and you're going to come across them in a group stage. So it's by far the most difficult campaign to be involved in. To back up international rugby 4 weeks in a go, very few players will start all 4 games. It's just so tough.
And Bryan, as you mentioned, at this point with Test rugby, anyone can beat anyone at any given time. The standard has just gotten so high. So with that being said, who are you expecting to do well? Is there anyone you're kind of hoping will surprise you?
For me, South Africa, New Zealand, everyone was talking about them having lost their aura, yet they win all the trophies available in the Southern Hemisphere across rugby championships. So I think they'll be looking to bed down their authority on world rugby. They were at their lowest point in terms of world rugby ranking pointings this year, and they're going to come up north. I think they're going to want to prove a point. A lot of young guys who are wanting to be in that World Cup squad. So for me, from a South African perspective, World Cup dress rehearsal, but I think New Zealand are going to want to come up and show exactly how good they are.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think Ireland, South Africa is one for me because Ireland did so well against New Zealand, but South Africa, I want to see how they do against one of the other heavyweights with a completely different game plan. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. And the thing with New Zealand is people will write them off. And before they won the championship, someone said, who do I think is going to win the World Cup? And I said, well, anyone who writes off New Zealand, and you'll testify to this, is a fool. They're a fool. They're coming in hot now. They've had 6 games under their belt. They've got the cobwebs off them. And I was with one of the ex-All Blacks the other day, and when people are writing them off, he's just got this smirk in his face. How can people doubt the All Blacks? They're always going to bounce back. New Zealand have got to be in their bonnet, a heck of a lot to prove. And you've got to remember as well that they've all beaten each other in the rugby championship, but the quality of that championship is so high. So to win 3, lose 3 is, if a home nation did that against 2 games against Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, that would be successful. So take it with a pinch of salt if South Africa lose, if New Zealand lose, because they're obviously playing a very high quality of rugby.
And Tom, your own nation aside, who are you most excited to see?
I'm excited for the entire tournament. I think...
Throw it out there.
Rugby is the winner.
I like them all. Do you know who my favourite... I want to see Japan.
Yeah.
They're the only team...
Why do you bring that up?
Why?
Why?
Sorry, Bryan, but I just like them for some reason. They're the only team that are playing both a Northern and Southern Hemisphere side, and I just quite like the idea of that they've just gone... They're just on their own, just fighting everyone.
Thanks.
Well, look, let's get stuck into it, guys. We'll start with the Northern Hemisphere hosts. And seeing as we've one of their captains with us, let's start with Wales. So what can we expect from Wales this season?
I think they need to aim for 3 out of 4, which means they have to topple either New Zealand or Australia. Georgia in the middle with Argentina. Argentina's going to be, again, a tough Argentina. But if they're at home, they should aim to be beating Argentina and Georgia, and then they've got to get a scalp against New Zealand or Australia. I think it's more likely to be Australia. New Zealand have had 6 games in the last couple of months against top quality opposition, where Wales haven't had any exposure together as a group since they played South Africa in the summer. So I think that game might just be one game too soon for Wales against New Zealand. So I think they could catch Australia, which is going to be at the end of a 5-test series for them, at the end of their season, and the Welsh lads are 3 months into their season. So I think Australia is the best chance we've got. I'm hopeful for a 3 out of 4. Maybe more realistic. It's going to be within 2 or 3 games. They're going to win 2 or potentially 3.
So I know, obviously Wales have quite a long injury list. Actually, we were chatting about this earlier. A lot of the teams do have, the injuries are really taking their toll. We've got another 5 uncapped players, and some very familiar faces have come back into the squad. But so who are your standouts from the squad, and what players do you think are going to impress?
Sure. Even as an ex-number 7, like Tame Basham, who was one of our best players going back 12, 24 months ago, isn't even in the squad, and there's 4 sevens picked ahead of him. So Justin Tippett's been announced as captain recently, which when I was thinking who was going to be Wales captain, I was really struggling to think who's going to be captain with Dan Biggar's injury doubts. Alan Wynne didn't start a test match in the summer, so he's not a dead cert. The one thing your test captain has to be is a guaranteed starter, because you don't want to put them under pressure going into week 1 if they don't even know they're going to start. You don't want that complacency, but they need to know they've got a good chance of starting. And then it came out with Justin Tipuric, and I thought, well, yeah, what an obvious choice. I guess I probably overlooked him because he's had a significant injury from the Lions tour last year. He's got a handful of games under his belt, but he's proven his quality already with the Ospreys. So whether they pair him with someone like a Tommy Raffel again, who did really well against South Africa, who is your proper hard-nosed, on the floor, old-school number 7, who gets amongst it. I'd love to see Dewi Lake continue at hooker and run the games at hooker. He's really, like Malcolm Marks from South Africa, he's that mould, he's that modern-day aggressor, but really skilled. And then Lewis Rees-Zammit, I think everyone was raving about him 2-3 years ago, rightly so. He's doing brilliant things in attack, but the reason he didn't play in a Lions test match was because there's areas of his game like cleaning out rucks, or even just making himself a nuisance in defence, or high balls, kick chase efforts, all these things that people don't look at from a winger, but is actually 80% of their game. His finishing ability is unbelievable, but what I was so pleased in the summer was all those things that I just mentioned, his breakdown work, his kick chase efforts, his high ball has come on leaps and bounds, which is why now he's always been a really good winger. But I think this autumn is another opportunity for him to really announce himself as a proper test match world-class winger. And he's going on that right path. So I'm looking forward to seeing his continued development as well.
Who do you think would it be faster between yourself and Bryan? Maybe back in your heyday.
Well,
in your heyday.
See Jared Harris in the crowd, so I'm not going to be talking about it at the moment. It's always tough, eh? I mean, I'm not quite sure what his 40-metre time is. So I
don't know. What was your 40-metre time?
My 40-metre time was 4:58.
That's quick.
What is your 40-metre time nowadays?
What? You, Japan, you just bring it all out, aren't you, Tom?
Because I remember the first time you came into my knowledge was you racing a cheetah.
Yeah.
What's the fastest animal you think nowadays?
Definitely not Jared Harris or the rugby guy.
Like a small pony.
Small pony?
An injured pony?
An injured pony?
I'm definitely...
A seahorse?
If I had to put on any exhibition race now, I'd probably do it against a tortoise.
A tortoise?
For context, sub-5 is quick. Yeah. So 4.5 is...
Yeah, 4.5. No, so I'd build my confidence tortoise,
You've also raced a plane, haven't you?
Boeing A380, yeah. So.
Maybe Tom later. Tom was kind of saying he might be able to beat you.
You can race me if you want.
Yeah.
Sure.
You're on the upward curve. I don't want to dismantle your...
I feel like I'm just coming into my peak as an athlete.
Cool, perfect.
We kind of just have a bit of a runway here, don't we? We could just run straight down.
Yeah, we can do that. We can give these guys pads as well. It'd be like gladiators.
I mean, Sam will know, at the end of your career, the games become just so much stuff, and I know you sort of ended early, but when you go over the 32-year age mark, Mondays are a really tough training session, so you normally skip those because it entails a lot of stretching. So I need a bit of stretching, so at least about a day prep to stretch.
So what we're saying, Saturday before the game?
100%.
We will take a look at England next. So Tom, will you be getting down to a game this November?
I'll be trying to. I quite like how England's tournament looks. It sort of goes on an upward ramp for me. So was it Argentina first? Mm-hmm. Then, who's the second one? Japan, thank you. Oh yeah, how can I forget that one? Japan, my main boys.
That's like a mini
I was
World
actually
Cup
chatting to
pool.
the Japanese guys in their training camp earlier today. They're really up for it as well.
They're super excited.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Close personal friends of mine. Then after that it's New Zealand and then South Africa, who obviously are the big dogs who we lost to in the World Cup final. So that to me is a nice trajectory that just gets more and more exciting.
Well, I know this week, wasn't it, the English players, they took part in the Japanese, is it Misogi water ritual? And they'll also be taking part in mime training sessions. Did anybody else hear about this?
So who's this?
In England. So when you kind of, I think what I find interesting is when you kind of go away and you do some research about England, it tends to be like a lot of the headlines are around what Eddie Jones is doing and all the eccentric stuff, and it very much does take its focus away from the squad. But just on that, with the miming training sessions, have you guys heard of this?
No, what is that? You'll have to tell me. Do you know?
So they basically
Apparently they did it ahead of the 2015 Rugby World Cup in Brighton as well now.
They've done it a few
like
times. So
going through doors and stuff.
no, silently. So they take part in training sessions and nobody speaks to each other, and it's all about like
Connectivity. Yeah, so Eddie is very big on doing things differently, and he does that to try get the best out of his players, to put them in positions to be thinking differently about it. And rugby really is about that sixth sense of knowing if you're throwing a pass. And New Zealand do it brilliantly. Every time New Zealand throws an offload, you almost know someone's going to be catching it. And Eddie is trying to develop, particularly some of the young players, into understanding what is needed, to win a World Cup.
Doing crazy stuff as a team is all good for team building, right? You guys must have done some mad stuff back in the day.
What was the most unusual training session that you guys have ever taken part in?
I've been on tour to Wales. You guys are insane.
We did
In the
like
valleys.
we did like a King of the Ring. So we do like a fitness session where they literally you completely empty the tank, running circuits, stuff like that. And then we go into, this is when we went to Poland back in the day. Went to this horrible sort of spit and sawdust training camp, and we just sort of had they said all the forwards into the sandpit, and it was literally like a Royal Rumble. It was the last man standing, and you just had to wrestle everyone and get them to the deck. I did all right. I did quite well. One of the good guys, Tipperick, did good because he's got a good engine. Andy Powell, I think, was the winner because he was just such a big guy. He played against Andy.
Well, look, now moving on to the number one team in the world. And no, I am not being biased. It's literally where Ireland are in the world rankings. First game for us is against the current world champs, Bryan. Obviously there's a lot of history between these two sides. What's the feeling like back in South Africa about this game?
So the feeling back to South Africa, we actually haven't done well against Ireland over in Europe, for the last couple of years, which again is something that Jock would definitely want to rectify as quickly as possible. I think it's brilliant seeing Ireland do what they did against New Zealand in the summer earlier this year. It's never been done, and I really think it meant a lot for World Rugby to see what is possible. It's going to be tough going to the Viva and trying to topple this Ireland side. I think what Faz has done, and how he's created a culture of youngsters really stepping up, but the seniors, playing an incredible impact. Johnny Sexton at 35 years old is still absolutely brilliant. South Africa are going to know they will need to be at their utmost best to even have a chance, because it's not easy going to Dublin and winning at the best of times. So, yeah, I'm not going to favour Ireland, but I think they're definitely going to go into the game as favourites.
Sam, who's Ireland's danger man?
He's their greatest asset, and I think he's their greatest weakness at the same time, and it's Johnny Sexton, because similar with France and Dupont, if Dupont's fit for 7 games in the World Cup, France got a great chance. If Johnny Sexton's fit for 7 games in the World Cup, Ireland got a phenomenal chance. Realistically, he'll play 6 games. He's definitely going to miss a group game. But he'll have to play every knockout, of course. So if he's not there, they've got players with great talent there. Joey Carberry and Carty's been doing a good job at Connaught, but if Johnny doesn't pull through, then I just worry. He's such a good communicator, and when you watch Ireland's attack, it's the most. I've never seen a team so organised, and it's actually really hard in attack. To defend is actually quite easy to defend for long periods of time, because you sort of stay on your line, you come up, you come back. When you attack, you've got to constantly get into depth. So when you hit a ruck, you've got to get back on your feet, reload into depth. And when you've got to do that 20, 25 times, which Ireland can do, it's so exhausting. And that's why teams lose shape and they end up getting turned over, because players don't have the fitness to keep that shape up. But Ireland just keep repeating this amazing shape where they just keep throwing numbers at the line. They have a lot of deception, a lot of options out the back. And they all kind of know what's going on, and they have a lovely mix. So sometimes they just power it up off 9, and then they can tip it, they can pull it out the back, and they could do that Eddie Jones training session where they mime, because They just want to know if the players know where they're meant to be. So suddenly when you bring back in communication, it's a piece of cake. So I think given how organised their attack is, and that's what stunned New Zealand a little bit, they stopped New Zealand from playing in the summer by competing heavily at the breakdown, heavily at line-outs. Any opportunity New Zealand had to launch their attack, they would stop. Then Ireland's attack is just relentless at the minute. And I don't think anyone in World Rugby can attack like Ireland can. So if they keep bringing that A game, and Johnny is a huge part of that, so my point being is, if Johnny's not there, will the attack function the same way? Well, I don't know right now. Not against the big boys anyway, so that's going to be their biggest challenge.
Well, look, snapping at Ireland's heels...
Sorry, so you're not giving your prediction?
My prediction? For the whole series?
No, for Ireland, South Africa, sorry.
For Ireland, I think we all know. Well, I mean, I remember when you played in a game, was it in 2006? You scored a try for South Africa against Ireland in the Aviva? We went on to beat you, didn't we?
Well, it was the old Lansdowne Road, and I actually played 13 that game against Bryan which was not a good...
And why was it not good? Now, what? Remind me, what happened after that game?
The wind was horrible.
What happened after that game?
Andre Pretorius kicked the penalty, and it literally crossed the crossbar and came back to the 22. I was like, that doesn't happen in South Africa. The wind was all that made it bad.
And the wind was the only thing you can remember from that game?
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the fact that Bod, the goat that is Bryan O'Driscoll, went to your change rooms afterwards to swap jerseys, and what did you do?
You got to give context. I think context.
He ghosted him. He burned him.
Context is very important. So it was the centenary game from the first time South Africa played against Ireland. So we got this special jersey made with a white collar, this massive number, and I was not supposed to go on the India tour, and Jake White had a few injuries, so he picked me at 13. I'd never played an international game at 13 before 2006. I'd played about 23 test matches, and I came up against Bryan O'Driscoll, who I'd written an essay about as a 21-year-old when I moved from scrum half to centre. So I was like, okay, well, this is absolute legend. And that specific game jersey, because you get 2 jerseys per game, but Jake said Canterbury, our sponsor, had only made a set of 22 because there weren't 23 players. So unfortunately, someone else in the squad has to get your other jersey. And we're like, but what do we want to swap? I'm like, Bryan O'Driscoll. So I got given the opportunity to give one to Cheryl Calder, who's the eye visual specialist, and obviously the game didn't go well. And Bryan O'Driscoll tells this incredible story about how he sort of came, this youngster who was on the stage and doing phenomenal things, came into our change room, and he offered me his jersey. And I was like, hi! No.
Did you tell him that you'd written the essay about him, though?
3 years later, which I...
Have you read the essay out to him yet? No?
I feel like this is a love story that's scanning
the two
decades.
brides.
No, 10 decades. No, I haven't. No, I don't have it. It went to a specific coach who did the whole change. So I don't. It's in a garage somewhere.
You carry it with you at all times. It's definitely like in your wallet or something with a picture of Bryan. Yeah.
In front of the
it was
photo of
before
his
the
wife.
internet when crib notes were allowed. So let's not go there.
Well, look, we will move on to France then, the reigning Six Nations champions. They're actually coming into this series on a 10-game winning streak. How scary are France looking right now, Sam?
When they hit if you look at every team's highest ceiling, then France's ceiling is as high as anybody's, if not potentially higher. So it just goes back to that consistency thing. Can they keep doing that? So and a lot of their boys play in like where it used to be spread out amongst a lot of French clubs. Now there's a good crew of them at Toulouse, and they play a lot of combinations that are fairly close together. And this team now is so many times you covered French games where they've been like, they've had, 50 players have put on the shirt in the last 12 months or something ridiculous like that. There's a much more consistent selection, and you're sort of seeing that consistency in their performances as well. And I think Sean Edwards is he's been a phenomenal addition, and he's not stupid. When he took on the role, he's looking at the player group he's got, the 3 years he's got to nurture them towards a World Cup, which is one thing he hasn't got in his CV, one of the only things he hasn't got. And you even watch the top 14 now, they all defend like France, they all defend Sean's way. And the biggest difference I've seen is just France have always had a massive appetite to defend. So when there's turnover, they kick into attack and they play their rugby, which we're all very familiar with. But what they've got now, they've got an appetite to defend, which is as great, if not greater, than it was to attack. And that's quite a scary combo.
And what is a match day like in Paris?
Oh, it's hostile. You must have played there a few times in Autumn Nation.
No,
it's probably the most hostile. I always find the French it's a very hostile crowd. Like if Wales plays Scotland, it's like a friendly Celtic rivalry. Ireland's always that's probably the second most hostile. Twickenham's always a great atmosphere, given the Welsh-English rivalry, but I find You go to Stade de France and it's just like this wall of just, for like 80 minutes. It's like football-esque, you know? So it's very different. Stadium's massive. It's quite, you drive up to Stade de France and I was like, oh, is that it? When I first played there. Actually disappointed at how small it looked from outside. But then you go in and those who've been there know the bottom tier goes into the ground. So it's sort of, it's like kind of below ground level, the pitch, quite far below ground level. So you go in, and you walk out to the stadium and it's just phenomenal. It's a beautiful stadium. So stadium's great. Fans are very hostile and noisy. And it's one of the great atmospheres.
It must be quite good, though, if you can't speak French, you don't know exactly what they're shouting.
I don't speak French. Because
that would be brutal, wouldn't it?
Warburton, your nose is massive, or something like that.
Yeah, just hit Warburton at the end. Warburton.
Well, look, who outside of DuPont are you keeping an eye on this series?
Thomas Ramos has been really good as a fullback, the last while. But for me, Damien Penaud, on the winger, has been phenomenal. Like what he just looks like this lanky character that goes about his business unassumingly, but he is incredibly quick. He is extremely talented, and like in contact, he's just as good. So being able to do offloads and stuff like that is brilliant. I think there's a massive loss with Veremi Vakatawa that unfortunately, is no longer being able to, play the game over in France. We're hoping to see him at some other country in the world, because he is just such a skillful player. But Damien Penaud for me is just incredible in his ball set, his ball skills, and his ability to finish as well as put other players into space. It's phenomenal, and I think from an experience perspective, he brings so much to a very young backline and just adds so much incredible prowess.
Same name. I mean, we can be here. It's easy to say DuPont, of course. He's always in one of their best three players, but I think Penaud is arguably. You got maybe Will Jordan as well, who's on form at the minute, but arguably the best winger in the world right now. I just think he's been good for a long time as well. He's been about 4 or 5 years now. He's been really good. So I'd agree. Damien Penaud right at the minute, I think, is their X Factor player.
And now on to Italy, and I am sorry to make you relive this, but that game for Italy at the end of last year's Six Nations, what did everyone make of it? Like, it was absolutely phenomenal.
I got so much criticism from Italians. My Twitter feed was full of Italian abuse, so I couldn't read Italian. Couldn't speak Italian, which was great as well. But like when the result actually happened, it was fantastic for Six Nations rugby and European and world rugby. So they were all like, Warburton, like laughing. I was like, no, it's great. Like I felt it was a bit of a kick up the arse that Wales needed as well. Wales are sort of floating along, and since then it sharpened the minds of Wales. They went and had a good tour in South Africa. So I thought they'd win one game in South Africa because I thought, they'd bounce back from that humiliation, which it is. Like Argentina beat New Zealand the next week. New Zealand put 50 points in them. It happens, and sometimes you need an experience like that. I've been involved in plenty of bad games, and you go back and think, I'm never going to be involved in that again. So.
Looking back, can you pinpoint what the actual reason was you got trounced?
Well, everyone looks at the kick chase at the end where Capucha, Capucha, where he went through and the kick chase was terrible. But you can't blame a moment in the 78th minute to why you lost against Italy. Like, you should be way better than that. If the South African boys are looking at that, they're going to be looking at the physical dominance that they lost throughout the whole match, the set piece that didn't function or the kicking strategy that didn't work. So there's lots of moving parts. It was easy to look at, the kick chase was rubbish, but it should never come down to a kick chase to play in Italy. It's much more about the whole game. You shouldn't put yourself in that position with 2 minutes to go. But credit to Italy, they hung in the whole game away from home, and they had the composure and X factor to finish that. It's great that they did that. So the thing is now, I really hope they kick on from it. You don't want it to be a flash in the pan. You want them to have a good autumn, another competitive Six Nations, because we want 10 teams in the World Cup competing. So the better Italy do, then the better it is for everybody.
And who is standing out for you? Is it Capuzzo again, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's just signed now in France, and they don't sign deaf players in Toulouse, isn't it? So I think they need someone like an X Factor player that can not hang their hat on in a sense, like give him the ball and he'll do the job, but you need in a game, from marketing perspective, you need someone that is marketable for Italy and that people want to come to stadiums and watch them play, and for us to get excited about pre-match to talk about. So he would be the obvious one, and given that there's going to be so much growth in him, given he's so young, he'd be one that I'm really looking forward to seeing as well.
But I also think Italy are sort of missing, post the Sergio Parisse era of this talisman that was always, at the top level. Even when it was going badly, you had that one person, particularly up front. And I don't think Italy have found that at the moment. There's a couple of guys trying, but no one's really stamped the authority and said, like, not that I'm the new Sergio Parisse, but I'm the guy that everyone can look to, from a leadership perspective, from a skill and talent perspective, and actually take that responsibility. So, yes, it's great having, the backs being able to do X-factor type instances, but unfortunately rugby is a game where if you're not laying a good foundation up front, and I think that's where Italy need to really improve, because they're struggling to just get that consistency up front to match, the ex-Marshall and Castro Giovanni's of the world that, from a tight head perspective or loose head perspective were incredible in just giving a foundation, which I don't think they've had, and unfortunately has seen their demise.
And finally, let's look at Scotland. Lots of team news obviously coming out of Edinburgh. No Finn Russell. Hoggs dropped as captain. So who's the main man now?
It's an interesting one, that. And I was sort of doing a little bit of reading around it. And, Hogg and Russell had that incident. And then I think Russell didn't play after that in the last game of the Six Nations. Then Hastings started all 3 games on the summer tour. So you wonder, are they planting the seeds then? Hogg was rested. And now Hogg hasn't been given the captaincy and Finn Russell isn't involved. I think it's much more, you're not doubting their ability, but as a leader in a group, you have to show the way. And you can't have, I love Stuart Hogg, he's a good friend of mine, I think he's a phenomenal player, but I think it's hard to have your captain or to have a captain who is preaching professionalism and excellence and a win-at-all-cost mentality when things like this in the past have happened. Ultimately, the coach and captain set the culture. So he's gone with Richie and then with Townsend as well. They got 12 months to create this perfect culture for them to have a chance next year.
Well, I think that's kind of the end of all our home nations. But just before we kind of finish off there, I want to ask you, Bryan, what's your favourite Northern Hemisphere national anthem?
When you get to play in the Principality, and nothing against the Welsh, they are unfortunately very harmonic. Shane Williams has got me quite a few times in a karaoke bar in Japan in 2019, and I had to walk with my tail between my legs because I was like, why would you do that? Why would you embarrass me like that, Shane? Because he's just so good. So listening to the Welsh anthem with the roof closed at the Principality is probably the best experience. It's God Save the King now at Twickenham, which I haven't heard yet, so I think we're all waiting interestingly with that one. But yeah, Principality for me, the Welsh are just, hopefully, is the GOAT returning? I heard the GOAT might
Shenkin he's called. Shenkin, he's got a name as well.
Shenkin.
But yeah, he should be there. He should be there back on home games.
Is that because of Tom Shanklin? Or?
I don't think it's because of Tom Shanklin.
Who looks after the GOAT?
He's actually got a home. He actually lives in, I live only maybe a couple of miles from him. I'm talking like he's a human. Well, I remember he used to, because obviously the goats die, so it's not the same guy. Do you know what I mean? So he carries the name. Yeah, he carries the name with him. So he's in Maindy Barracks where the army train. There's only a couple of miles from my house, and he's actually they train him in there. Yeah,
that's cool.
It's very interesting.
Didn't expect that to come out this afternoon.
We've mentioned a lot of kind of standout players, so I hope people have been taking notes now for their fantasy teams. There will be a quiz at the end as well. But moving on to the Southern Hemisphere then, Bryan, what is it like travelling around from your side? I know there's probably a lot of bus trips, and I would actually really like to know, what was the hierarchy when you were part of the South African team on the bus?
So I love travelling. Coming up to Europe coming to Europe every time this time of the year is pretty special. I made my debut against England in 2004, playing at Twickenham against the then world champions, and bar the fact that it is freezing from a South African point of view because it's summer. I absolutely love touring. The South African team culture, we actually had quite a few golfers in our team, so coming up north, the opportunities that you had to play golf here was fantastic. I know some of the boys got out to the old course at St Andrews last year. Some of the courses in Ireland and in Scotland are pretty special. And it became a lot tougher as the pound and the euro started becoming excessively expensive. And I remember back in the early days, we'd actually have a Telkom World call card because it was too expensive to actually have your cell phone over here. But I loved it and experienced a different culture, different way of life, and you don't get to be able to be in Europe, which is pretty special. So a lot of card games in the hotels, but I think the boys get to experience, quite a bit of unique culture and history, which we don't have, in the Southern Hemisphere. And like I said, when you come back to a place that has so many memories, when you made a debut, it's pretty special. So this series, in terms of Autumn Nation series and what it has become, I think is really special. It's become bigger and better over the last 15, 20 years, and hopefully it is the start ahead of a Rugby World Cup series that I think is going to be pretty special.
Did you find that the service stations haven't got many good food options in England? Because Burger King shuts at 11. So most of the time you end up doing a packaged sandwich deal from like Marks and Spencer's.
So you must
and they've stopped doing the prawn sandwiches now.
So you must understand, for a lot of South Africans, when you come over to Europe for the very first time, bar the massive culture shock. So petrol stations are a classic example. We actually have people putting petrol or diesel into our cars in South Africa. So when you arrive at a petrol station in Europe or in the UK and you stand there and then like no one comes, it's like, this is awkward, what do I do now? And then your card doesn't get accepted. So it's a very unique experience, petrol station, bar the food.
If you had to sum up the UK in 3 words, because you've been here, you come over all the time, a young South African lad is like, right, Bryan, explain the UK in 3 words to me for your time touring. How would you describe that?
Expensive, cold, and dark. So when you come at a time of the year, I mean, you come from summer, but like the sun only comes up at 8 o'clock, sets at 4 o'clock, during
you've got to rush team training and stuff.
Got to rush team training. I mean, I've got to some Barbarians games where we've had like an hour window to be able to train. So I'll never forget I'm sorry to rattle, my first test match. I'm on the bench against England. It was like my first ever European tour in the November. It was horrendously cold. So I hated the cold. I had a full tracksuit, I had a beanie, gloves on my hands, and we were warming up, and there was about 8 minutes left of the game. We were getting absolutely obliterated by this World Cup phenomenon team that was England. And John de Villiers and Brayton Paulson both got injured at the same time. So I was on the bench as a centre, but we both went on as the wing. And as I was about to run on, the team manager calls me back, and I'm like, flip, it's 8 minutes, like this is my international debut. And he goes, no, Bryan, you're still going to go on, but you please need to take the beanie off your head to go on the field.
And the snood.
Beanie. Well, they didn't have snoods back then, but yeah, so cold, dark, and wet.
Bryan, talk to us about South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa, interesting stage. I think it's going to be very interesting to see where Rassie Erasmus is in that first game against Ireland, because his official ban has come to an end, so I'm not quite sure whether he's going to be pitch side or in the box, because he wasn't even allowed to be in the stadium, I think, over the while. So a tough autumn, in my opinion, coming up against the number 1 and 2 teams in the world, teams that we're probably going to face in the World Cup. A lot of injuries, a lot of guys that haven't played in the last few weeks. One thing I do know, that coming to the Northern Hemisphere, if your pack doesn't front up, you're going to be found wanting, the Irish pack particularly. And for me, someone like Eben Etzebeth, has just been phenomenal. I think he's played 106 test matches for the country, the youngest ever to do that for South Africa, and he'll probably go on to potentially play 140, 150 potential test matches. And he just has this incredible athletic grunt, the enforcer that I think everyone can look to. Sia Khaleesi as a leader is brilliant, but up front, if anyone is a go-to, this guy is someone that I'm looking forward to. So a tough autumn, 4 test series where a lot of our players won't be available, for that England game, because they ply their trade in Europe and in the UK. So a great mix. There's some very incredible youngsters coming through. I know there's one particularly that Eddie Jones had his eye on, Sasha Ngomazulu, who is dual citizenship, capable of potentially playing for England, and there were rumours that Eddie might be trying to rope him in, but I see Jacques Nienaber has pulled him into the training squad back home.
Do you think that any of the current squad would have made it into your World Cup winning squad?
I was about to ask him if he thought he would make it into this squad.
That's
a much better question.
Take him a day to warm up.
Listen, Makazole Mapimpi became the first South African rugby player to score a try in a Rugby World Cup final, so it doesn't say much about my Rugby World Cup playing abilities, but I'd give myself a good crack. When you've played 124 times for your country, you'd reckon you'd be able to make a nod.
Sam, what is it like playing against South Africa?
Bryan mentioned about the pack having to make sure they turn up, and that's not the problem. It's a good thing, because people respect South Africa so much, but in the north, you pride yourself as a pack on how you come up against South Africa, because that is the benchmark from a physical point of view, set piece and all those things. So that's the thing that the pack have got. Every game is their biggest game, because everybody wants to see how they fare against South Africa. It was my favourite game to play in against the Southern Hemisphere lads, because that was like my game. I loved that game plan. I loved the physical game plan. I loved challenging myself against South Africa. And that's why, for me, I'm looking at Wales aren't playing them now, but it's part of any young internationals graduation. I won't really judge them as an international forward until they've come up against a South African pack, a proper one, and come out well. So if somebody's like, this guy is second row, he's this, or this number 8, I'm like, if he hasn't done it against South Africa, I'm going to wait until he plays them. It's a physical confrontation where the most physical pack, 99.9% of the time, you'll win the game. If you, I don't want to say beat up, it sounds the wrong word, but that's the terminology you use, you know?
Physically impose.
Yeah, physically impose, which we wouldn't say that in a meeting.
It's almost as good as what?
Brian didn't believe me yesterday when I said that I used the word discombobulated in a sentence. He was like, that's not a real word. And to his surprise, it was.
What?
Moving on to a team that I think will be forever linked with South Africa or Japan. Your friends.
Oh, the lads.
Your pals.
Love them. Literally just got off the phone to them in half time. They're roaring to go.
Well, what are you hoping to see from the Brave Blossoms then?
Lots of rugby. 2 halves. 40 minutes each.
Couple of points.
Yeah. Passing, tackling, the full team.
Is there anything else you could add to that analysis there?
No, I can't add anything to that.
No, so I think Japan, obviously what happened in 2015, beating the Springboks at Brighton and then replicating that in 2019, beating Ireland, who were at that stage also the number 1 team in the world. Sorry, Christina. I think they haven't then just kicked on. There was this massive play post-Rugby World Cup 2019 that Asia is this next dominant environment to where we're going to get new fans, get the game growing. I think COVID unfortunately put a stop to that because it literally hit a rapid halt. And Japan have always peaked in terms of getting to quarterfinal, the first Asian team to do so in 2019. And I think with the likes of a Michael Leach, they're sort of looking to continue that progression. There's talks about do they get included in a Six Nations, expanded Six Nations, where do they go because they're not playing a lot of rugby or not getting a lot of competition. So they do have excitement. I think something Eddie Jones installed is a work ethic that is incredible, a speed of play both at club level and international that, for us in 2015 was very evident. They've got a lot of international players plying the trade in Japan now as well, which again improves the whole environment of experience and skills. So I think it is that consistency that they're looking for. They're coming up against challenges in the Northern Hemisphere, the likes of an England that are going to be tough and looking to Rugby World Cup next year. How do you grow your squad with the mindset that if we do well in this autumn, we can take that through to next year? So a lot of excitement. I think it does get hampered in terms of the weather, the style of rugby that Japan wants to play. They love this fast, quick game, not a lot of physicality because they unfortunately don't have the biggest players, but it is that consistency that I think they're looking for at the moment.
Well, let's talk about Australia.
They'll be thereabouts again for a World Cup. Hooper's coming back into the squad now after some time away, which is good. Foley's, some of the old boys are sort of rolling back the years. Skelton's coming back now as well. So a couple of guys who are playing in Europe are sort of back in the squad. And I think coming to the North, they'll need someone like him, with his size. And that's what the Northern Hemisphere teams pride themselves on is, I think, might not have the ability to play at the same tempo for the same duration as Australia and New Zealand and these boys when they play in their Super Rugby Pacific, and that's what they're used to. It's a bit of a different game, so they have to challenge them and beat them up front, So bringing back someone like Will Skelton, I think, is a really smart addition. Slippo's 120 odd caps is as captain instead of Hooper, so a lot of experience, bringing back some size, and if they can still sprinkle some of that stardust. And I really like Paisami at 12, who's incredibly physical. Korobetti at 14, again, they got some real X-factor backline players as well. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to see it. The nice thing, I actually don't know how they're going to go against them. They're either going to get I don't want to say no one gets badly beaten up front, but they're either going to get dominated up front. And I think that was New Zealand's downfall when they played Ireland. Not having the South African teams in their domestic season now, they're not exposed to that high level of physicality as regularly as they might normally be. So coming up to the North rather, and suddenly having a completely different game style might throw them a little bit for the first game or two. But I'd expect New Zealand and South Africa to do a lot better up here because they have that physicality up front, which maybe Australia don't quite have, and England showed that worked against them, in the summer.
Someone like Michael Hooper does make a massive difference from a leadership perspective. He's probably one of the best flankers that the game has seen in terms of his ability to just be everywhere and physically dominate. So I think that'll have a very positive impact. They've lost the likes of James O'Connor, Quade Cooper, but then brought back a Bernard Foley to just try, particularly in their back line where they are very inexperienced in the international scene. So Dave Rennie's been vocal about what they want to do, what they want to achieve. They've got an extended run. 5 weeks over in Europe is no joke, and I think he's done that with the mindset of seeing how this young group measures up ahead of a Rugby World Cup. So yes, there's experience. yes, there's talented players, but how do you mar that all together, over a long period of time, which can only be told, once the 5 weeks is up. So they're going to come here wanting to do as well as they can.
It's exciting. And then moving on to New Zealand. I mean, where do we even start with them? The year 2022 has been an absolute roller coaster for the All Blacks. I mean, I think it's an understatement to say that. So the pressure is on for them. But how dangerous is a wounded New Zealand?
Well, I remember Roy Best saying to us in the Lions, and you would have experienced this, when it was in 2017, because Ireland beat them, I think it was in Chicago, and then the next time they played them, they said they got pumped. And he said, and when we won the second test, I remember he got in front of the group and was like, there's always a reaction when they lose, always. Argentina saw that. That's why I was so impressed with Ireland's win, because I thought on test 3 they were going to come flying out. And even Ireland were down with the sin bin with, I think it was 25 minutes to go, and New Zealand scored 14 points on the bounce, and Ireland still had the resilience to hold them off. So that's why I was so impressed. Ireland didn't just beat them from good game plan. I was talking to, sounds like a really bad name drop, but he's just a very credible person to speak to about this, was Kieran Reid recently. And somebody said, what's the difference between New Zealand and all the other teams? He just said, when they're their best, he's like, just have a mentality just to bring so much intensity for 80 minutes. They're one of the most physical teams in the world. You watch their clean-outs, they're ruthless. So they got to get that part of their game right, coming up north, which they will do. They've got 9 games under their belt already this season. So they'll be good. They'll be good. And I always thought he was a top player, and it was interesting. Kieran Reid said he reckons New Zealand's best player is Scott Barrett. So he's the most underrated player in the whole New Zealand squad. And he said he's the best of the Barretts. He's our best player at the moment. So I'm going to look forward to watching him more closely as well.
Yeah, particularly at 12.
This is such a sad, muggly question. But what's it like having the haka done to you?
It's fine, because the boys. Yeah. It's just like you doing it. It's like, I know it was just Tom.
It's not like me doing it, because I'd be doing Morris dancing, and it'd be pathetic.
Do you think you'd break a sweat if you were
the crowd all love it. The crowd all love it, but Bryan be looking across going, Kieran and Ardy and Rico, it's just the boys, It's just but all the crowd love and buy into it. It's just a formality for a game. It's great. It's great that you're there. You're like, this is cool, play New Zealand from the haka, but it's just like the anthem. For me, it's just a formality. Get it out of the way and let's get kicked off.
What about the first time, though? Surely the first time you're like, this is pretty good. No,
the first time is because there's this aura, there's this everything about the All Blacks. So experiencing it for the first time is really
cool. It's cool to experience.
It really is cool. It's like, as an international rugby player, you want to measure yourself up against the best in the world. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is the haka is a war cry. It is a literal vocal, physical challenge to the opposition to say, okay, well, how are you going to meet this challenge? And yes, there's an aura. Everyone sees this incredible spectacle, but it's a challenge. And I think for the I faced it 20 odd times. The first time is cool, but then it almost becomes I know that guy. And for us, and you can't show it on telly, but you actually look to who the funniest person is. So I'd like to
who's got the best tongue.
So I'd try to spot Ali Williams in the opposition. I'd where's Ali? Because I'd watch him and I'd just be laughing incredibly inside because his facial expressions are incredible. And then towards the end, you sort of look at your opposition and almost accept the challenge because that's what it is. So I think it's a great spectacle. I think Fiji, Samoa do the same, and no one really talks about Fiji and Samoa because it's all about the haka. So we're going to experience a lot of that over the autumn, which I think is pretty cool.
Have you seen that Fiji YouTube video of the team doing it? I think to the groom on his wedding day.
Yeah.
As a pair, I thought that would be the most faithful marriage. If those guys are just, okay, I'm going to treat her well.
Well then, moving on then, on to Fiji. Obviously, they are always so good to watch. They're fun, they're fast, they're ferocious. Has there ever been a moment when you've been playing them on the pitch where you've kind of just stood back and gone damn, that's they're bloody good?
No, Rugby World Cup 2007, we just witnessed Australia lose to England, who we'd beaten 36-0 the week in the group stages. Then we saw France beat New Zealand. And then we got to play Fiji in Marseille a day after England had beaten Australia. And it just felt like everything was against us. And they were just playing this phenomenal brand of rugby where anything they touched turned to gold. They were throwing offloads between their legs, behind their heads. It was just it was trying to chase ghosts. And for us, there was a pivotal point where we were 20 points all with 20 minutes to go. And we were totally under the pump. The 60,000 strong crowd at the then Marseille Stadium or the now Velodrome was totally against us. They were rooting for Fiji. And JP Peterson had this incredible tackle on the Fijian lock in the right-hand corner. And then John Smith pulled us together and he said, we're too good to let this happen to us. And it literally happened to Argentina. It happened to Scotland, to Wales, I think in 11.
Yeah. 7.
Oh, 7.
I was 11, not under my watch, bro.
Sorry. Apologies, Sam. I'll take one for the team there. But they just are this phenomenal bunch of players. And then you get to play with a few of them. I went to Toulon, played with someone like Joshua Tuisava, who... Oof. I know we're going to potentially talk about Semi Radradra and a few others, but like Joshua Tuisava is just an absolute beast. I'm grateful that I played with him and not against him. His one thigh is like the size of mine together, and then he like runs just as fast. No, it's incredible. So they're brilliant ball players. I think there has been a very heightened sense of professionalism brought into that Fijian squad, which potentially hasn't been there over a long, consistent run. So an exciting group of players. I think the wet sometimes takes away from their skill abilities up north in the autumn, but they give it a full crack.
The thing with Fiji is similar to Japan. Like they had some games in the Pacific Nations Cup where they could play Australia A, Samoa, Tonga. Some good things, some things still need to improve. But as Bryan said, they've got some of the single most talented athletes in world rugby. Phenomenal athletes, which I could lift as much weights, take as many steroids as I want. I'd never hit their physical heights. You just can't. It's genetics.
You
just can't compete. So the reason South Africa, when you're under the pump and you're playing Fiji, you're trying to compete with them athletically, which you can't do. So what you do is then you revert to game plan and tactics and that structure, and that's how teams beat them. But that's where if Fiji get that part right, then all the infrastructure could be scary.
Just on the subject of physicality and massive thighs, my mum, no. What's the hardest body type or player to tackle? In a one-on-one situation, if you had to pick massive big fridge or nippy little Speedy Gonzalez, which are you going for?
No, the big excellent. So my parents always said, like, the bigger they are, the harder the fall, and the harder they fall, and I always come up, the bigger they are, the harder they're going to fall on me. So the nippy ones are probably the easiest to tackle. They're the most difficult to catch, but the bigger guys, I'm sure there's been this thing recently, I think for us, talking about the Pacific Islanders, particularly 2007, we played against Samoa in our first game in our Rugby World Cup campaign, and I'll never forget the first line out. We had Donnie Rousseau and Skalkberger as first and second defender off in the vacuum. And we had Henry Tuilagi. So the lineout was probably just inside our half. And you had Henry Tuilagi, who was probably standing on the Samoan 22, getting a run up. And he set off the play. So as soon as he started running and gaining momentum, the hooker then knew to throw the lineout because he had to get at full pace. And I stood like about 15 meters diagonally from Donnie and Skalk watching this absolute behemoth running, and like Donnie is sort of like one arm in, Skalk's trying on that, and he like literally bumps Donnie, carries Skalk 6 meters, and to think that Manu Tuilagi is the smallest of the 5.
Yeah. I agree with that. I wasn't trying to sound all macho with a hacker, like it didn't bother me because it doesn't. It's just a hacker. But Henry Tuilagi was the only opposite player I was actually like, oh. I didn't. I'd much like Bryan said. I'd rather someone. It's easy to train. Not easy. You can train someone like Bryan, like forwards, kick chase. Bryan runs at you. That's a nightmare. When you're under fatigue, someone of Bryan's footwork and pace is a nightmare. Mm-hmm. But then you chuck someone who just wants to. If you have a forward who wants to go from A to B, it's fine. So a big fridge forward is quite easy to tackle. Yeah. But the thing with Henry Tuilagi, he was a massive fridge forward with just unrivaled power and footwork. And I played against him once when I was 20, coming through the system. And it was a baptism of fire. And it was the one time that I was really humble playing international rugby, absolutely demolished me. So he's one player by far. I'd never say I was scared of a player, but I was scared of any Tuilagi.
Okay. Well, guys, moving on to Los Pumas, Argentina. What are we hoping to see from them? I know obviously Checa came in as head coach. He seemed to turn their fortunes around almost immediately, and now it's kind of reverted a little bit. So what are you expecting from them now?
So I think for them, it's consistency. Michael Checa, I think he's actually got 2 coaching jobs over the autumn. He's doing some rugby league coaching, apparently. So he's sort of fulfilling a debt that he's made a few. But I think it's consistency. They haven't actually come over to Europe at any time in the autumn nation and actually done well. There hasn't been that progressive succession. And having these one-offs, beating New Zealand, beating South Africa is incredible. But to really be consistent over a longer period of time, to back it up every weekend, so you can't beat New Zealand one weekend and then take 50 the next weekend. So I think for them, in a group that's becoming a lot more experienced, there's a lot of guys that have experience but aren't now potentially starting because the younger guys are coming through, and Czechs would really want to make this team understand consistency, particularly in this period where they play quite a few games. They love going to France and playing in a Rugby World Cup, as we saw in 07, and do well against France. But for a lot of their players who aren't based in Argentina, they don't have a local competition anymore because they're no longer in Super Rugby, and it's sort of a struggle. So we've witnessed some incredible moments over the last year and a bit, beating New Zealand last year, backing it up this year. But then it's the consistency for me that they'll be wanting to get key over this time period.
It's why you don't see many Test series 3-0 whitewashes, because to reach that emotional peak 3 weeks running is really hard. And I think Argentina fall into that, not so much France are much better now, but where France were before is Argentina can have if you look at who's the most emotional teams you played against, it's France, Argentina. Yeah. So they're just very emotional teams. They can hit this emotional peak and you just have this tidal wave of just pressure all game, and then Argentina can deliver that. But again, it's just but doing that 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row, that's the biggest challenge for them. So on the day, can be a phenomenal team, but like Bryan said, the consistency is probably what's going to hurt them at the World Cup.
And now, just before we wrap this up and move on to our fantasy rugby, Samoa and Georgia are also playing games this autumn. What game are you most looking forward to seeing out of those two?
Wales have Georgia, so in the World Cup, and obviously now in this campaign. And I've always been I want Georgia to get as much exposure as they can. So I've always like tier one teams need to put their names in the hat to play Georgia and give them this game time, because their players have to revert to the French league more often than not to get the exposure to top class rugby. Their domestic league is way off it. So when you look at a test team, and if they've got 10 players who play in the Georgian league, well, they just can't compete because they just haven't been exposed to that level of intensity. So the more they can play international teams, the better. I mean, this is going to be a 5-10 year journey at least for Georgia. It's going to take a long time. Yeah,
I'm also at the Wales-Georgia game, and going to need to learn a bit of pronunciation.
Yeah.
Jones, Gordon Yashvili, but Yashvili, it's going to be
tough. They say that, they with commentary, they say, we'll put you on Georgia. When I was doing it early days, we'll put you on Georgia because there's a little bit less pressure, there's less viewing figures. I'm like, yeah, but you've seen the team sheet. It's Wales-England is a higher profile game, but it's a much easier game to commentate. I'm like, that's not an easy game. So my first couple of games, Georgia and Tonga, I was like, oh, great, it was tough.
This year, the Autumn Nation Series is also running its own fantasy rugby tournament. I've been quite nervous. I think I was actually most nervous about this part because we've all gone and put together our own fantasy 15 teams. So with the tournament, you can earn points for tries and assists. You can, as well as dominant tackles, line-out steals, metres carried, and for your chosen kicker this year, you can get 10 points for a successful 50-22. So we've obviously spent most of the show kind of reviewing different players, and now it's time to see everyone's teams. So Sam, I think we're going to take a look at yours first.
Yeah.
Sam Warburton's fantasy team, right?
I actually had 6 All Blacks in there, or 7, and then I was told I can only have 3, so I had to really change it. So
yeah, Brian's a stickler for the rules. Did he rat on you?
Oh, what did he do?
Did he rat on you?
I'm sticking out. Nah.
Oh, you did it, did you?
You did, didn't you?
No, I ratted on him 100%.
So
6 All Blacks.
Yeah, so they're not. This wouldn't be anywhere near my team, but if I was like my sort of best 15, but playing to the sort of 3 players per country, the ones that I would always go to, irrespective of the 3 per team rule, would be Ellis Genge. Has just been an absolute revelation in the last. Yeah. I mean, he's always been good, but I mean, since he's been given like a captaincy tag at Leicester, and he's really grown into a leader of England, I just think he's the single most damaging loose head in world rugby at the minute. Taukiaho at number 2 has been amazing for the All Blacks. I think he is the world's best hooker as things are right now. So, Malcolm Marx was a close second. He was a close second.
Taukiaho better than Malcolm in terms of world ranking at the moment.
I think right now he's my form hooker.
Big call, Warbs.
He's my form hooker right now.
I'm going to move across a little
more. Scott Barrett from the recommendation of Kieran Reid, so I'm going to take that one. That's not my credit, that was his.
Nice name drop there as well.
Yeah, I know, just pick that back up. And then Ty Byrne was, you'll know, Christina. In the summer, he was just phenomenal against New Zealand. I think he was Ireland's best player. I think Rieko Ioane has been amazing at 13 for New Zealand as they brought him in off the wing. And Freddie Stewart is just so sound. And Koroibete and Rhys Amick just got X-factor moments in them. So I probably would have had that Will Jordan in there. I think Ardie Surveyor should be up for World Player of the Year. I would have had Ardie Surveyor in there if I could have had more Kiwis. But Hamish Watson's a pretty handy number 7 himself. So, but that would be my 15 there or thereabouts.
No Frenchies.
I wasn't sure if you're allowed to pick. I didn't pick any French. I thought it was the home nations and the Southern Hemisphere teams, so I didn't go with any French.
Can we just please send Sam the Fantasy League rules again?
If that's the case, I put Penno in for Koroibete. That's what I do.
So are you happy with that team, Bryan? Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult, when you're looking at fantasy teams, how you pick, teams that are going to win. And my team will definitely be changing week on week, depending on, who gets selected. You can only choose 3 from a team, and that team, if you put a Barbarians jersey on them and put them against any team in the world, that's going to be a pretty spectacular game to watch. So, yeah, players that are at their personal peaks at the moment, and players that are absolutely dominant in terms of how they impact the game. So,
Sam, when it came to putting this team together, who was the first player you were like bolted on?
It was actually Ellis Genge. Not because I started at number 1, but it was Ellis Genge.
Yeah, he's world class. And the other tag, 2 tags. I'm happy with that. Will we move on to Bryan's team? We will.
Go.
All right. Talk us through this.
Yeah, so I went to the...
Not one Welsh, explain.
You said 2 out of 4 would be good.
Fight.
Those are teams that are going to win. I think the front row, Stephen Kitshoff's been phenomenal. I think as leader, he was part of the bomb squad for the better part of the previous campaign up to Rugby World Cup victory in 2019. But he's got a lot more game time, which I think is really important. Samisoni to I would have gone with Malcolm Marx, but I'd already chosen a few South Africans and then had to change my team again. So Tyke Furlong, undisputed in that position. You spoke about Johnny Sexton, and his ability to play rugby. I don't think there's a better ball-playing front row in world rugby than Tyke Furlong at the moment. I mean, the ability that he has to pass a 20-metre pass, he sidesteps a few backline.
He's unbelievable. He's so light on his feet.
Twinkle toes. I think Ibn Etzebeth, I said about him earlier, the manner in which he enforces, he's just turned 31 years old, and the ability of him to continuously be at a level that is phenomenal. It's incredible to see. I put Tyke Byrne at 5 because I just think they're going to win quite a few games, and didn't want to move him anywhere else, so he's in my side. Sia Khaleesi, inspirational captain that I think deserves all the accolades that have come his way. He's a guy that has not only been inspirational, but he's actually been playing an incredible level of rugby over the last couple of months. He's moved down to the Sharks, and almost like a new lease of life, and he's been phenomenal in that role, particularly in the Rugby Championship. Michael Hooper coming back, I think, is important, and Courtney Laws is a guy who has moved out to the flank and is just playing some fantastic rugby. Antoine Dupont, I think he is up there with the best players the game has ever seen, and again, if he gets it right, the French are just unstoppable. Marcus Smith at 10, I think he's got this opportunity in the autumn to cement his place in that England backline. He's got a lot of pressure from Owen Farrell, but the type of rugby he's playing at the moment is just non-negotiable to add him there. Same centre pairing as Sam, 2 players, Tulangi at 12. If he gets it right, there are a few players in the world that are as good as him at 12. Rieko Ioane has just been phenomenal this year. He had a bit of a slump towards the end of last year, but his ball playing ability, his ability to offload, he's a winger playing in the 13 jersey, and I think his strike rate. And a backline, Will Jordan, success in terms of try scoring ratio at the moment is incredible. Stewie Hogg, I've just put him there because I think he's got a lot of effort to need to get back to where his plaudits deserve to be. He's a guy that I extremely rate as a person, as a rugby player, but given what he's gone through off the pitch, I think he's got this opportunity to almost revitalise how people view him. And then Damien Pernod has just been phenomenal on the wing.
Awesome. Tom, you ready?
No pressure, Tom.
Yeah, no, I mean, we won't dwell too long on my team, let's be honest. I'm not the reason why you're all here to listen to my tactics, but so I've got Cyril at number 1, because I was watching him, and he's what we described at school as a unit. I think he should be pushing a plough in Bordeaux.
Cool.
I was very happy with him. Malcolm Marx, again, massive and handsome. I think he'd make a good Thor. in the Marvel films. I was watching a YouTube
Thor.
video.
A Thor.
That's Dwayne from England. No.
Do you not think?
No, Dwayne is exactly Thor's carbon copy. But I hear what you're saying.
Well, we'll agree to disagree, Brian. But I was watching a YouTube video of him, and he fell out of a ruck, and his thighs went like that down the video, and I was both scared and aroused at the same time. And that's one of the main tactics I'm going for in this team. Tag Furlong again. I think we've talked about him. Amazing. Mario Itoje, because you want a troll in the pack, and I've seen a lot of videos of him just talking, and I think he annoys the opposition a lot. That's his tactic.
Does he? Has he ever gotten into...
I think he's brilliant at what he does. I don't think there is a scrum off in World Rugby at the moment, if they're playing against England, is not wary of the Mario Itoje threat that comes, and he toes the line of the law so well.
He's incredible at that line.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so again, and having that heat on your 9 who is touching the ball 60 to 70 times a game, but knowing that there's this animal beast, I wouldn't call him a troll because...
No, but I mean troll is that online troll.
Yeah, would you call him a troll to his face?
No, not that he looks like a troll. I mean, he trolls people.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell him you call him a troll, but... Okay.
No, don't do that.
Sam, was he ever...
He was... it wouldn't be like banter, but like say when, like if you're in a line out, your coach make as much noise as you can, because when you're calling a line out as an opposition, you can't betray the call to the rest of your team, so he's just a nose like that, so, and he's very good. He's probably the best person treading that offside line, as someone like Sergio Parisse was fantastic at it for Italy as well, which is actually a rule I think we need to get rid of, is this whole, you can't slap the ball out the scrum half's hands, but you can play his arm, because it's technically a tackle if you're on your feet. I think we've got to kind of get rid of that. It's a little bit negative, but it's in the rule book, and he plays it perfectly in line-out mauls and at ruck time at the minute.
Yeah,
please continue.
Eben, then number 6, Josh VDF, who he's had a brilliant summer. He's been instrumental role in Ireland's series defence against New Zealand, and he's just got married to his long-term girlfriend, according to Google.
He is so lovely.
So he's scoring on the pitch and at home, and I just hope the dream continues for him. He's made my side. Then RD at number 7, who we all know is awesome. I don't think it's a controversial thing to put him there. No. But also I found out him and his wife own a team, an outfit clothes website. So if I'm going to manage a fancy team, I wanted someone to make the kit as well. I'm thinking in the bigger picture.
Bigger picture, well played.
Although I would say I went on the website and all their stock is sold out, so I don't know who's doing their admin. I'm happy with that, though. That's not a bad... It's like trading out the youngest person for the oldest person. That's fine. I'll do that.
I mean, you could do a lot worse than Johnny Sexton, let's be fair.
I'm very happy with Johnny Sexton.
Obviously, I very much started from a place of how many Irish can I fit onto my team, and then just kind of worked around that. And in fairness, I gave a couple of spots to the South Africans. Johnny's going to be my captain, 100%. I might be showing a little bit of bias about who I've put on the wings. Hamish Watson I just think he's incredible. We were talking about a stat earlier. I don't think he's missed a tackle internationally since like 2019 or something. Like, he's amazing. Yeah, again, I think we've all put in the 2 tags. CQC. Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossovers between our teams, but I feel like if we combined the 4, we'd be like an unstoppable force.
If they're all playing at the same time on the same pitch, yeah.
Pretty scary, wouldn't it?
It'd be too many numbers, if anything.
Who would you fancy going up against?
Who would I fancy?
Yeah. Would you fancy your chances against?
Oh, like physically?
Yeah.
Or, no.
If someone was running down your channel, who would you be like, yeah, I fancy that. I can take him. I'm
going to go for Malcolm Marx.
Wow.
Yeah, little Don't just clip that out, okay?
Well, look, guys, if you think you have what it takes to beat us, maybe Tom's team, my team, Bryan's, whoever's, head to the automnationseries.com and click the link for Fantasy Rugby and create your team. And don't forget to pick a captain and a super sub for double points. So before we wrap up, we wanted to hear from you guys, and we asked Gemma, the lovely Gemma, aka the Prop Life, to put some questions out to our TikTok followers and for Bryan and Sam to answer.
I asked my TikTok followers for the weird, the wild and the wonderful questions for you both. I have now blocked 200 people, but I do have some questions. I'm going to start with a more serious one or a more thoughtful one.
Cool.
What's the most exciting thing about the future of rugby?
Oh, the most exciting thing. So I think for me, we constantly talk about this global season. I think there's been a lot of external interest from VCs and where the financial impact of the game is coming from. I think if the first time that the game has ever had the next 3 World Cups planned out, and for me, America 2031 and 32 is something I'm really looking forward to. There's a strategic play around how that is a potential sleeping giant for rugby, and a new market, a new territory, new fans, and building up, after Australia, post 2003, which I think is going to be fantastic. So I think there's been a strategy from World Rugby put in place that everyone is, unfortunately, whether you're aligned or not, you know what's happening and you can now plan and prepare for that. So, whether you're in the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, you know what the targets are. I think the growth in the female game has been phenomenal. Watching the Rugby World Cup now going on in New Zealand, and seeing the prowess of the females. I get the fortune of being able to be on the 7th circuit as well, and seeing the growth of the game. And if we're talking to new audiences, seeing where the female game is going as well. So that, knowing what the future is, how countries, federations can now plan for that and allow opportunities for growth, I think is exceptional.
It's really boring. Pretty similar. The USA World Cup is awesome, and hoping the development of Fiji, USA, Georgia, Japan continues on that trajectory. And also a little bit biased because I love this aspect of rugby, but the Ladies Lions Tour hopefully to form as well. I'd love to see a Ladies Lions Tour as well. That would be fantastic.
This is a bit of a fun one that I really liked the look of when it appeared on my newsfeed. Now, Sam, if you were to play in the backs, and Bryan, if you were to play in the forwards, which positions would you want to play in?
Oh, I used to play 13, and I wasn't allowed to tackle enough people at 13, so I moved into 7. So I loved 7 because I loved that physical sort of confrontation. But I played 7 from the age of 10. All the way till I turned professional. But there was a couple of times where, for certain teams, I played at 13. So I would have loved. I wouldn't have the quality to play at 13, obviously. But if I could be born again, add a little bit of pace, better handling ability, I would have loved to play 13.
So 2007, we had a pre-World Cup training camp in Cape Town where Jake White had sent a sort of B-string side to New Zealand and Australia. And I'll never forget this one training session. We actually had Rassie Erasmus as a consultant, and we had Barley Swart, who had won in 95. And we obviously didn't have enough players. I think we only had like 14 guys that had stayed behind. And the forwards needed opposition at line-out small time. And like, no, backs, you're going to do it. And we were like all standing on the 22, like, no, we actually need to train our mauls. And I was literally in the hooker position, looking at this ball getting thrown in, and we had to try stop a maul for about 15 minutes. I think after the first ruck where Osterrand and Victor Matfield stood on my hand and head respectively, I said, I'm not doing that in my life again. So I'd probably be on the flankers where I don't need to get my ears cauliflowered or get hit in a scrum. So probably, I'd go 6 though. I'd probably go open side instead of blind side.
Nice. Third question was, if you could play any other sport at a high level, which sport would you pick?
Golf. I'm horrible at it, but just that it's the one game, and I get to play socially at the moment, that absolutely humbles you every time you play it. But there's an element of sort of mental discipline, effort, skill that is just incredible, and the ability to socialize and network. I think it's a phenomenal game. So golf. Last
time I played golf, I sort of went on a golf sabbatical because I was so angry with it, and then my local club said, can you just do somebody's paid X amount of money to go to charity. So the first 2 or 3 holes obviously went terribly, like I thought, and this is 2 years ago, I haven't picked up a pair of clubs since. And then as I was walking up the 3rd fairway, I had another 15 holes to play with these strangers. I thought, where can I fly tip my club so I can never see them again? And I got home, I got all my golf kit, my golf shoes, put it in a green recycle bag. I went to the nearest Salvation Army bin and I just put it in the bin, put the clothes away, and I'm not playing golf. So it wouldn't be golf. I would have been football. Secret, I love football. I still play 5-a-side with my mates now. I'm retired. Go down the local pitches and we still play. So I love football. I would have played football.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm just going to ask one final really quick one because I'm personally fascinated by this one as well. Which one player did you always want to play on the rugby pitch, either at club or international level, but you didn't get the chance to?
Oh, good one. I know mine straight away. Yeah, I don't think, no, you wouldn't. Mine is easy. I remember we played in France and he was still an Adidas ambassador. You'll figure out who it is. He was still an Adidas ambassador, and I was playing for Wales against France. Went down to breakfast, and he played for a club in Wales, so he knew some of the staff. And I went down for breakfast, didn't expect to see him there. I sat down, I saw him there. I had to go and get my brekkie with my mate to compose ourselves. It was Dan Lydiot, and we were stood by the breakfast buffet going, holy shit, Jonah Lomu. Sat down on the table, went back, shook his hand, Jonah, and I was like, my leg was shaking. I had like the DVD. I played Jonah Lomu rugby as a kid. I used to watch his VCR back then, days before, the night before I play a game for my school or something. And Adidas did a lovely tweet when he passed away. They said, we all played the game, Jonah changed it. And I think it's so true. Like, he was just amazing. So if I could wind back the clock and be in a dressing room with someone, it would have been an absolute privilege to be with Jonah Lomu.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Sam. I think I'm grateful that I never played against Jonah, literally as a direct opponent, because I think I would have been obliterated. 100 and 115 kilograms running at you, someone that can do the 100 under 11.8 seconds would have been pretty scary. But he was just, what he did for the game of rugby was unbelievable. I got the privilege of meeting him, face to face in 07 at the World Cup, and extremely humble guy, and just what he did for the game of rugby, I don't think anyone can ever take away from him. He became the game's first global superstar. I literally got an autograph from him back in '95 at the hotel they were staying at. So an icon that changed the game forever, inspired so many around the world, but brought so much good towards the game. And I think the rugby was better because of it, and when he left, the rugby was sadder because of it. So a phenomenal player that I'm grateful I didn't play against, because I probably would have been sat on my arse a few times, but someone that I would have loved to have the opportunity to test myself against.
And he'd still be a phenomenon 20 years later, 100%. I think. He played now, so he's amazing.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to Bryan and Sam, and to my wonderful co-host Tom here today, to our partners Breitling, TikTok and Sage, and to you all for keeping us company. Thanks, guys.